She was an educator, business owner, minister, political activist, and published author. Michelle unites two seemingly estranged subjects, God and government. In her book entitled, Does God Really Care About Politics? It raises all of these issues. She served on a multitude of high-ranking offices within the Republican Party, one in Alaska. She currently holds the office of parliamentarian within the Alameda County Republican Party and treasurer of the San Francisco Republican Alliance. Through her own organization, God and Government, she continues her journey of educating people of faith to engage the political arena from a biblical worldview. I want to say thanks to all of you for being here this morning and being panelists and helping us to kind of frame the upcoming election. And I guess, Aisha, who was supposed to go first?
Byron.
Byron, you go first.
I don't think I need a mic, do I? No. I did that just for you, though. All right. I'll sit it right there. One quick, real brief commercial. If you look out on the table, there's some business cards that say 1963 on them. That is to publicize my forthcoming book. And I would encourage you to grab a business card, go to the website, it's already constructed, look at the trailer. And if you're on Facebook, sign up for Byron Speaks if you'd like Byron Speaks to be on the fans page. In 1964 and in 1965, President Lyndon Johnson signed landmark civil rights legislation. The 1964 Civil Rights Act outlawed major forms of discrimination against minorities and women. It ended unequal voter registration requirements and racial segregation of schools, at the workplace, and of public accommodations. To give the 1964 Act more teeth, the next year Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act, which specifically outlawed discriminatory voting practices that had systematically disenfranchised African Americans. But Johnson, who as a Democrat largely supported segregationist policies during his years in Congress, had reached an epiphany. The civil rights movement had convinced the president that the landmark legislation that he had signed was not enough. It wasn't enough to make good on America's promissory note that all were indeed created equal. He then, in 1964, declared a war on poverty. And in fighting this war, Johnson proposed an arsenal of legislation known as the Great Society programs. Among its monumental goals included Head Start, Job Corps, Upward Bound, food stamps, Medicare, and Medicaid. According to Johnson, the challenge of the next half century, whether we have the wisdom to use our wealth to enrich and elevate our national life and to advance the quality of all American citizens. Johnson's words and his subsequent action marked the last time any U.S. president made poverty such a high priority in the public discourse. Earlier this year, the presumptive Republican nominee Mitt Romney in a CNN interview said, "I'm not concerned with the very poor. They have a safety net there. If it needs repair, I'll fix it. I'm not concerned with the very rich. I'm concerned about the very heart of America, the 90 to 95% of Americans who are struggling." Now, however you feel about Romney's comments is really secondary. The fact is, no one cares about the poor, not at least in any tangible way. Who is the presidential candidate right now talking about poverty in 2012? There seems to be, this is the one area where you have a bipartisan prohibition against the overt use of the word poverty or its myriad forms. Elected officials opt instead to use the amorphous term middle class to obfuscate the reality that so many Americans face today. Poverty poverty in America has created a multicultural version of Ralph Ellison's epic novel, Invisible Man. They are physically visible, but their humanity remains tragically invisible. So the moral question in America 2012 is, what type of nation do we choose to be? And the answer to that question has everything to do with how we treat the most vulnerable members of our society. In my view, children and seniors ought to be exempt from the Darwinian survival of the fittest that dominates so much of our public discourse. When Johnson declared a war on poverty in 1964, the nation's poverty rate was 19%. After the institution of those programs by 1973, poverty had declined to 11%. Today, poverty is at a 20-year high of 15.1%. It's also accompanied by stagnating wages, and a recent report that said 1 in every 662 houses received a foreclosure notice in March. This has produced what I would call an inverted order, where the least of these are not those on society's margins, but the top 1% that control more wealth than the bottom 98%, earning as much as the bottom 60% collectively. Now, again, I don't care how you feel about these issues. You take issue with how I just define this inverted order of least of these. My question is this sustainable? What is the tipping point where the portion of the population that I define as the Bob Dylan demographic becomes unmanageable? Bob Dylan penned the lyrics to a song, and he said, when you got nothing to lose. And as long as that number remains manageable, we can have politicians behind the amorphous term middle class, even though, according to a 2012 U.S. Census report, 1 out of every 2 Americans today is either in poverty or near poverty. So why do I raise this at the black elected officials' faith-based breakfast, whose theme is the 2012 president's election and empowering the black vote? We have a growing Bob Dylan demographic. All you have to do is turn on the news or pick up your Oakland Tribune or Continental Times or whatever paper you have, or just live in an urban community, and we see case after case where folk who have nothing act out in ways in which they have nothing to lose. Amen. And this Bob Dylan demographic is not bound by race. What does it say? That the richest nation in human history has no response to the growing levels of poverty in America. I saw the Secretary of Education boasting about the fact that education budget for the last year was increased $4 billion. Afghanistan gets more than that in a month. Jewish brother I know, who served as the itinerant preacher, told me to remind you that whatever you do for the least of my brothers and sisters, you also do unto me. But in my view, if you read my column, you know I've written this many times, politics, whether you like it or not, is an amoral enterprise. Now, that doesn't mean that at times there are moral outcomes, but politics is an amoral enterprise. No matter how much you hold the framers of the Constitution in high esteem, we wouldn't have a country unless there was a compromise in 1788 that said, we're going to make the black male slave 3/5 for census purposes. And if your moral critique for justice only applies to one political party, you don't have a valid critique. So the burden rests on your shoulders, everyone in this room, to participate in the clarion call first laid down by the prophet Amos to let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. So I invite all of us to engage in what I like to call that declaration of interdependence. Let us commit to be spiritual volunteers in a movement of peace and justice, to lift those who are down, to put a smile on a downtrodden face, to open the eyes of the spiritually blind, one born has already died. Send us to the elderly, so that the winter of their lives might be filled with the joy and renewal of spring. Send us so that poor blacks, poor whites, poor Hispanics, and others might come to realize they have more economic self-interest that unites them than the percentage of melanin in their skin that divides them.
Amen.
We must commit ourselves to a struggle that fear and hatred is no match for possibility and hope. And let us also proclaim that dissent is not unpatriotic. Dissent is the oxygen of our democracy, and without it, we risk choking on the fumes of our own megalomania. Let us confess in the words of Martin Luther King that we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality that's tied to a single garment of destiny. But we hold certain truths to be self-evident, that all are indeed created equal, and we have been endowed with certain inalienable rights, and among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Amen.
And because it is the pursuit of happiness, we also know there's a nexus of hope that stands in the gap, a nexus of hope that says weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. A nexus of hope that says every valley shall be exalted, every mountain and hill shall be made low. A nexus of hope that will make the rough edges smooth, the crooked places straight. And not only does our independence connect us to each other, it also connects us to our past. Therefore, we believe that Martin King was right. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice.
Amen.
We believe that James Russell Lowell was right. Truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. Yet it is the scaffold that sways the future.